Hey everybody, welcome back to GoRails. In this week's episode, we're going to look at how we can use ActiveSupport duration to simplify how we display and calculate durations or lengths for models and records in our Rails applications. So let's dive in. All right, so let's get started here and make a new Rails application. Let's say Rails new, and we'll just call this calculate duration. So while that's running, I just want to talk about briefly where these ideas came from. So these ideas that we're going to see in this video about leveraging ActiveSupport duration came out of a refactoring that I did recently in the GoRails code base. It's part of a bigger feature that's being released over on GoRails soon. A little sneak peek or inside information there. I'm not going to get into what that is just yet, but there's some new stuff coming, so be on the lookout for that. But yeah, so essentially we had two different ways that we were calculating lengths of episodes and series. Now, a series is just a collection of episodes categorized. And they were using two different mechanisms. So now, after implementing this approach here that I'm going to show you, they now use the same logic and setup and implementation for calculating durations. So let's dive in. All right, so let's go ahead and get started by changing into our directory for our new Rails application. And now I'm going to generate a couple scaffolds here. So the first thing I want to do is, let's say Rails G scaffold for, let's make the episode scaffold. So we'll say episode, and now an episode should have a title. That is going to be of type string, so we'll just leave that as string as the default. Let's see, we also want to set a duration column. Now this could be, you can name this length, you can name this whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it duration here. I'm going to set that to an integer. And now an episode can belong to a series, but it's optional. So what I will do is I'll say series references and then edit the migration in a second here. So let's generate this scaffold, and then before we get into the migration stuff, let's generate the next scaffold for a series. Now a series can also have a title that is going to be of type string. It will also have a duration column that is going to be of type integer, and I believe that is it for series. So let's go ahead and generate that scaffold as well, and then we can hop into our code here, and then let's look at the migration to create our episodes table. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to this duration line here, and I'm going to set a default value of 0 for that. Now on the line below it, again, an episode can belong to a series, but it's going to be optional. So this null false I'm going to change to null true to allow nulls, and we'll keep the foreign key constraint there. So let's save that, and then let's go into the series migration, and similarly we'll set a default here for 0 for that. And I'm opening a new tab here. Oops, pop this back open. And then over in this tab we want to run our migration. So we'll say let's do a bin rails db migrate, and let's migrate our database. Okay. All right, so with our migrations run, let's go hop into our model files and set those up. So we'll go into our episode model first. So we see here it says belongs to series. Again, they can, but they don't have to. So we are going to say optional true right here. And then let's go into our series model here, and we will say has many episodes. Okay, and now as a next step, let's go into our seeds file and give ourselves some sample data to work with. So let's go into seeds.rb. Let's see, we'll come down here on this new line here. We'll say, actually, let's start off with a little bit of login here. Let's see, creating the first series. And then we'll copy it down here, and we'll edit this and say successfully created first series, and let's just get rid of these dots here. Now, in between these puts calls, we need to actually create a series. So let's do series.create, and then the title, we'll give it, let's see, Rails for beginners. And then, let's see, we're not going to give it a duration. We'll take the default value. That's what we want, because as we'll see, the way that the calculations are going to get populated for a series are based off of the sum of the episodes durations that belong to the series. So that's good for a start there. And then let's make 5 episodes here. So we'll do 5.times do. We'll capture the number now as a block argument there, but that is going to start actually at 0. I don't want that, so I'm going to reassign in the beginning here to the value of n plus 1. And then let's put some login in here. We'll say creating, let's see, episode, and then we'll interpolate in right there. And then we need to actually create an episode. So we will say episode.create, and then the title, we will just call it episode, and then we'll just interpolate in again here. And then let's see, duration, I'm going to set to a random number, if I can type, between 500 and 1,000 inclusive. Now, the way we're going to represent the lengths of episodes in series, or the durations of episodes in series, is again as an integer, but that integer is representing the number of seconds that the duration of a given episode or series is. So 1,000 seconds is 16 minutes. So between 500, whatever that is in minutes, and 1,000, I guess it's 8 minutes, right? If it's half of 1,000. So anything between 8 minutes long and 16 minutes long here, again represented as seconds. And then for the series, we only want to set a few of these to belong to our series above, so not everyone. So what I'm going to do here is, for series, I'm going to say if n is odd, we will assign it to the series that we created above. Otherwise, we would just set it to nil there. Okay, so with this setup, we should be able to seed our database. So let's go ahead and do a bin rails db seed. And we should see our output, creating the first series, successfully created the first series, and then creating episodes 1 through 5. So let's hop into the console and check things out. So we'll do s equals series dot first. And we'll get a series. So it's our Rails for Beginners series. And now let's check out all of our episodes. We should have 5 episodes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, looks like. And then every other one should be assigned the series ID of 1. So our first one is, the second one is nil, third one is 1, fourth one is nil, fifth one is 1. Okay, great. So we have some seed data to work with, and we also see the randomness of the durations that we set in here. So that's worked for us as well. Okay, great. All right, in our console, let's grab the first episode just so that we can have something to work with here. So say e equals episode.first. There's our first episode there. Now, if we look at our duration column, we can see it's 895, but I'll call it down here again. So e.duration is 895. This is, again, representing seconds. Now, typically, I think I've seen it definitely a few times myself. A lot of people store durations or lengths of records as a series of seconds in the integer column, or a number of seconds in an integer column, and then they write methods to then convert those into minutes and hours in order to get something, for example, that says, 16 minutes and 30 seconds, something like that. Now, that's fine and all, but if we leverage ActiveSupport duration, we can actually make that a lot easier. For example, if we were to take this duration that we have right here and pass it to ActiveSupport duration.build, we can see what we get back here. So let's do that. Let's do ActiveSupport duration.build, and then we will say e.duration. And then we see immediately the output we get back is it converts that integer of seconds to minutes and seconds, like a pretty formatted string there. Now it looks like a string, but it's actually the class. But we can get this back if we do, for example, actually, let me just save this to a variable here. So duration equals that. So then if we look at duration.class, we'll see it's an ActiveSupport duration. Now you might think that you could call duration.toS to get that formatting there, but it actually just outputs the integer as a string. Now we can get the 14 minutes and 55 seconds to print out, but we have to use inspect. So we'll say duration.inspect, and then we see we get back the string of 14 minutes and 55 seconds. So already we've alleviated having to do all that calculation logic, like of converting an integer representing a number of seconds to a value that we can then interpolate into a string, formatting it in such a way. It's done for us already. So this is really nice. But we can take this a step further, because when we're interacting with our database, we're always just going to get back the 895, and we will have to manually, every time we want to format this pretty, have to do like we did here in the console and make a call to ActiveSupport duration.build, passing in the duration, and then calling inspect on that duration object to get this nice formatting back here. So what we're going to do next is we're going to use the serialize method to allow us to convert to an integer when we save to the database, and then instantiate as an ActiveSupport duration when we read from the database. So let's look at how to do that next. All right, so taking a journey over to api.rubyonrails.org, we can come over here. As you can see, I've already searched for it for the serialize method. Now, there's a number of them. The one we're looking for is from active record attribute methods. So if you click on that, that will bring this up for you, and you can read about it, but just quickly, it just talks about if you have an attribute that needs to be saved to the database as a serialized object and then retrieved by deserializing into the same object, then you can specify the name of the attribute using this method, and serialization will be handled automatically. Now you can use any of these serialization formats, or what we're going to do is we're going to provide a custom coder class to have a custom serialization here. So if you scroll down in the examples here, you can see an example of a custom coder. So if we come back up and look at the custom coder notes here in the parameters section above, it says the attribute value will be serialized using the coder's dump method, and the dump method should take an argument of a value, and will be deserialized using the coder's load method, which takes an argument as well. Let's see, lastly it says the dump method may return nil to serialize the value as null. Okay, cool. So we just need to make a custom coder class, and then inside that class we needed to give it a class method for dump and a class method for load, and then populate the bodies of those methods with the behavior that we want. So let's hop over to our editor and do that next. But first, quickly before we do that, we can see up here it shows some examples of how to call the serialize method inside your models, and you pass it the column that you want to serialize, and then you pass it the serialization class or coder class that you want to use to do this serialization. So now let's go over to our editor and look at how to do this. All right, so back over in our editor, let's work on our episode model first. So I'm going to open up our episode.rb file, and now we want to say, we want to make our call to the serialize method inside of here. So we'll say serialize, and then the name of the attribute or column that we want to serialize. For us, with this model, it's going to be our duration column. And then we now want to pass it our custom coder class. So let's call it duration coder. And now we have not created this yet, so we'll do that next. So from our episode.rb file here, let's edit app models. Let's look in that directory here. So we're going to put our custom coder class inside of app models. I'm just going to make a new file here and call it durationcoder.rb. Okay, and then let's see, we're going to say class duration coder. And then inside of here, we want to say def self dot dump. So this is going to be when we're saving to the database. So when we're saving to the database, we may have a ActiveSupport duration object already. So if we do, we'd want to convert that to an integer. And it does have a toI method on it. If we look at the documentation over here on duration, we can see that here's toI, and if we look at it, it will just return us back the integer. So this will give us, if we remember back to the episode that we had in the console that had a duration of 895, it will take the ActiveSupport duration object, if it's been converted, and we'll convert it to an integer, so the 895, and save that to the database. So let's go back to our code here. So we want that to take in the value. Let's put us a little guard clause in here. Real quick, and let's just say return in less value. And then all we want to do is we just want to say just what I said a second ago, value.toI. So that's how we're going to serialize it to the database. And now when we're reading from the database, we need to set up our load method, I believe it was. Let's see, let's look back over here. Yep, load. Okay, so let's do self.load. Needs to take an argument as well. Let's put us another guard clause in here, just like above. So we will return unless value is truthy. And then inside here is where we want to do our deserialization to our ActiveSupport duration object. So much like we did in the console, we would just make a call to ActiveSupport duration.build, and then we will just pass it the value. So that is done, and that is all it takes to make your own custom serialization class. So now if we hop back over into the console, and then we grab the first episode, equals episode.first, we have a look at our episode. We can see already when we do the read, we're getting the formatting or the object that we got previously in the console, where we were making the explicit call to ActiveSupport duration.build and passing this object's duration attribute to it. We get that already now. So now if we do e dot duration, we can see that again, right? And if we call inspect on this, we see that we get our pretty formatted string of 14 minutes and 55 seconds representing 895 seconds in a pretty format for us. So this is great. We no longer have to make the explicit calls to convert it ourselves. We can just let our custom coder class handle the serialization and deserialization for us. So yet another win for using ActiveSupport duration. So now that we have our custom coder class set up, any model that we have in our Rails application that we want to use this with, now is just really as easy as adding the serialization line that we did in our episode model to the any other models class. So if we again go look at episode.rb, this serialized duration and duration coder line right here, we can just take this line, and so our series model is going to need this as well. So we can now go over to series, paste that in, and then now if we go into our console and we grab series.first, we can see that instead of just the default of 0 as an integer that we got when we're reading, we get back a duration object. So if we do series.first duration dot inspect, we can see that we get 0 seconds. So again, we're getting some free stuff here all over the place. So again, any other models that have any sort of length or duration that needs to be calculated and formatted pretty like this, we can use this app-wide everywhere to do so. All right, so just real quick before we wrap part one of this up here, just looking back at ActiveSupport duration documentation, it's highly likely that you've used methods in ActiveSupport duration before. For instance, like ago, if we look at that, maybe say like 1.hour ago, or let's see, in days, you can convert 12.hours in days to get a number of how many days that is, and so forth. So it's quite possible you've used these methods before, and there's some really cool ones in here to help you produce what you need. Parts is cool. It returns a hash of where the keys are like minutes, seconds, and the values are the actual integers representing those parts. So yeah, so ActiveSupport duration is definitely a very useful feature in Rails, so it's worth a look into. So with that said, we're going to wrap up part one here, and in part two of this, which will be coming out next week, we'll look at how we can take this even further and how we took it further in Go Rails itself to better isolate and centralize the logic for calculating and updating durations with associated models. So be on the lookout for that episode next week. And until then, take care, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.